Okay. All right, if everybody could take their seats, we're going to jump back in to the program now. We are super excited to introduce our next keynote here today. We have Charles Lamanna, Corporate Vice President from Microsoft, who runs the Business Apps and Platform Group at Microsoft, which is all of Dynamics, all of Power Apps and the Power Platform, Dataverse, and now Nuance Enterprise. I originally met Charles back in 2013 when he was a founder and starting a company called Metrics Hub that then got fairly quickly acquired back into Microsoft, a place that he had worked earlier in his career, and has had this amazing run of innovation in the 10 years or so since. First in Azure, shipping a bunch of products in Azure like Azure Resource Manager, Azure Autoscale, and several others, and then moving into this Power Apps and Business Apps world. Everybody knows that Microsoft is big scale, but just to give you a sense for what this Power Apps platform, what the scale actually is. So they just did a new release wave of applications, and in that release wave were intelligent applications for customer experience, customer service, field service, finance, HR, ops, supply chain, and low code. It sounded like a venture portfolio that they shipped all at once. Charles now has 5,000 full-time engineers in his organization. Power Apps is a $2 billion a year business that's growing over 70% a year. And Dynamics is a multi-billion-dollar business that's growing faster than all their peers. So with all that, we're super lucky to have Charles here today to share all the things he has going on. So thanks so much, Charles.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Awesome. I would say I feel a little bit like Daenerys with that introduction. But thank you so much, and thanks everybody for coming today. What I was hoping to share is the Microsoft view in the biz apps, low-code, no-code space as it relates to intelligent apps. And the good news is we're kind of at an inflection point at Microsoft over the last 12 months where we're really reimagining and repositioning and rethinking a ton of the different parts of that application and low-code portfolio, given all the amazing changes happening because of intelligent AI-driven apps. And I would say probably not as much as you would expect will change in the next 12 months, but probably a heck of a lot more than we all expect will change in the next 5 years as a result of this kind of change. And like Tim mentioned, kind of what I work on is this broad set of capabilities, and we call them like domain-specific or line of business-specific applications, like in finance or supply chain or customer service or field service and sales, as well as low-code, no-code. So this is kind of the domain that I work on, and so I'd say what I'm going to be talking about today is intelligent apps in the biz app domain, in the low-code, no-code space, and there's a huge amount of other intelligent apps being built. I won't go as deep there because I just don't know it as much. But the good news is kind of all these big businesses we think are going to look pretty different pretty quickly because of this change. And in fact, we've really anchored all of our plans for the next few years around this idea of reimagining business applications and reimagining low-code platforms. And if you look at kind of what that means for the customers that we support and we enable, the left-hand side is what we've been doing the last 10 years at Microsoft. Digital transformation. Every company has to figure out, how do I use technology and software to reimagine my business? And of course, you have cloud infrastructure, right? You know, VMs, EC2, Azure, GCP. But you also have PaaS, and you also have a lot of SaaS. In fact, the biz apps TAM is bigger than the cloud infrastructure TAM today. I mean, that'll probably be different in the future, but that's just the scale of what customers are looking to go out and purchase and buy and use. And this is every single conversation we have with customers is all about, how do I compete as usually not a digitally native company, you know, an enterprise, manufacturer, retail, that type of thing. How do I compete with digitally native companies? How do I become a technology company? How do I learn how to hire developers and build software? And that's kind of what we've been talking about for a while. We think that it's increasingly moving to the right-hand side. Every company is now going to have to start to think about how they become an AI company. And most folks, when they say that, won't know exactly what that means, just that they want intelligence in the solutions they build and the solutions they consume. And kind of this transition is barely, I think people are getting over the line. The left-hand side, the right-hand side is going to be another big period of disruption. And for me personally, kind of throughout my career, I've been fortunate to kind of see some big inflection points. And I remember back in 2012, 2013, when public cloud was coming at scale, like AWS was around $1 billion ARR, Azure didn't have VMs, GCP didn't even exist, it was like GCE. But you could sense that a lot of things were about to change pretty quickly at scale, and not just for technology companies, in every single industry. And that same type of sense is existing right now. That's how we feel and see in the market. And you see that in a lot of the fundraising activities that are happening too with small companies. Now, that's relevant for Microsoft because these types of disruptive moments are both great opportunities and also potentially great risks. So really understand what that means. And what we're kind of focused on doing is going out and finding a way to build the next generation of applications that are actually intelligent. And I would say AI and the classic biz app that you've seen in the last 5 years, probably not intelligent as it's going to need to be over the next 5 years. And I'll talk about some of the technology aspects in a second. Also, we think that a core thesis of this transition is that this next generation of applications that are intelligent are going to have to be built by everyone. And what do we mean by everyone? Not just coders, not just machine learning specialists, not just deep learning experts, people paid a whole lot of money and they spend 40 hours a week or 80 hours a week working on software, but people who work in the finance department, people that work in the operations department, people who do sales ops or customer service ops. And this idea of everyone participating is fairly different. And that's kind of why we think there's a big intersection between no code, low code, and AI stuff. So I'll talk about that some more. And so, kind of against this backdrop, at Microsoft, for biz apps and platforms, we really focus on 3 big pillars. 3 big things which are changing how every company is approaching biz apps. And they're pretty generic and pretty cliche of being data, AI, and collaboration. And what we mean by that is every one of our customers is kind of going through this journey where in the past, they were data poor. Like 10, 15 years ago, if you went to a company and said, how much data do you have about your customers? It's probably less than 1 terabyte of data. Now, if you go talk to someone and say, how much data do you have about your customer? You're talking petabytes. Massive, 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 hundreds of petabytes, massive amounts of data from their .com, from digital products, from communication and collaboration, all the different intelligent apps that have kind of existed in terms of data capture and data generation, structured and unstructured, is just piling up huge amounts of data. So customers are going through this challenge of how do I go from a data poor world to a data rich world where I'm kind of a little ignorant about what's happening to now I have more information I know what to do with. And that's a big challenge for how every company approaches this domain. And most importantly, that's a big opportunity to reimagine things like business apps. Second idea, the second big kind of belief we have, is we're in an era where big data is dead. And I don't mean like it's gone, but big data is not the big transformational thing anymore. Like I'm not going to go talk to someone who's leading a big project at a company and say, let's have your big data strategy. I've already done that. I already have a data lake. I already have a data warehouse. Like, what does this mean? The thing where most people don't have a strategy is what is their big AI strategy? And for us, that really is the foundational, huge models that have come out the last few years. That's the big AI strategy. And that's where so much of the innovation will happen for the next decade, just like how the last decade so much has happened from a big data perspective. The third one is this idea of applications moving away from a world where it's humans entering form data, navigating around, clicking around, but instead a world where AI is driving applications and then reaching out to people as necessary. And that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it's this idea of instead of humans driving apps, it's intelligent apps driving humans. And humans don't disappear, but the way they interact with the application environment and canvas is different. And this is a massive opportunity because if you look at something like CRM, and if you were to say look at a web-based CRM like Dynamics 365 or Salesforce, and you were to go back 40 years ago and look at a CRM that was run on top of a PC and a contact center connecting to a mainframe, it looks pretty dang similar. It's a list of things I click through and I get details of a thing. That's 80% of a CRM experience. This idea of instead, what if I don't actually navigate anywhere, but instead AI brings information to me? That's a different way of thinking about it. And a lot of apps that today are mission critical will become more and more like mainframes, and that people don't go there or interact, but instead AI interacts and operates on top of it and brings people in as necessary. Then the last bit, not as related to intelligent apps yet, but there is a link, I promise, is this idea of collaboration being critical, so going from solo usage to multiplayer collaborative usage across these apps. If you kind of stack these things on top of each other, this is, to us, what a modern intelligent application looks like. And if you go out and look at probably 95% of, say, business application revenue, it does not match these things. Classic ERP, classic HCM, classic CRM, those classic customer data platforms even, those types of things are not really manifesting. So kind of I'll walk through these and how that's kind of the opportunity for a lot of us, Microsoft included. If we look at kind of that data richness or the data kind of explosion, is I can't emphasize how much I hear a statement like this from customers that I engage with. This idea that data is your strategic asset, where their information to bring it as a whole company view is so critical to how they do business. And this is probably obvious for 100, 200, 500, 1,000 person company. But if you go to, like, say, the Fortune 500, where there's, say, 50, 100, 200, 300, 2 million employees, this actually becomes a really daunting challenge. How do you capture all the activities and all the engagements and all the operations at that scale and make it valuable? So this is kind of a big push that everybody has. And the good news is this investment as data as a strategic asset is what is laying the foundation for a lot of these big intelligent apps to be built. And one of the things that we really focus on in kind of our world in terms of biz apps is this idea of kind of actually mapping and understanding all the data in your estate and how it relates to each other. And what I mean by that is classically, say a CRM, you're looking at your data through a keyhole. You're seeing a very narrow sliver of all the information about your customers and how you're engaging them, right? Maybe you know some orders, some account information. Maybe you have auto capture for emails and phone calls. But it's a tiny, tiny sliver of how are they using the product, what telemetry are they generating as they use your product, where do they buy it, how do they buy it, what's the demographic information. There's all this other data you actually have inside the walls of your company, but you don't bring to bear as you think about your core sales processes, for example. And the analogy we like to always use is it's kind of like dark matter in the Milky Way. Like, we know it's there because it influences the orbit of stars and stuff, but we can't see it and we have no idea what the hell it is. That's what life is like for most lines of businesses and most departments. You have a very narrow view of your fragmented data. What we've started to see is a push towards something more like this. How do I actually get that unified data view? With things like data connectors, data integration, data movement, single enterprise data lakes, single enterprise data warehouse strategies, you start to get to a point where your picture looks more like this. There's much less dark matter. You can actually see all the data that's influencing your processes. And this has required a massive amount of groundwork as well. The API economy, right? If you don't use SaaS, it's pretty hard to ingest data. If you use SaaS, it's pretty easy because there's an API for that, as well as data movement and data middleware companies like Fivetran. So a lot of things have had to happen to start to get this view. And what we've found increasingly is this view is a precondition for a lot of the intelligence that our customers are looking for. Because if you don't have this holistic view, you can't actually start to beat what a single human can do with AI. Now, kind of what that means from like a business perspective and kind of where there's a lot of energy from our customers is like the reason you invest in these things and the reason there's big budgets and there's a lot of money being spent on this software and technology is because there's top line and bottom line benefit. Big revenue growth, faster time to delivering new components, ability to go increase your profit over time. Basically, the more data driven and the more, I'd say, intelligent you are with that data, the more capable your business tends to be. And kind of this data-rich environment is something that needs to be natively baked into an app, not glued on after the fact. And kind of as a consequence of all of this data is you also now have a whole new class of problems. And if you look at kind of the modern data stack, there's companies working to fill these gaps. Like, what data do I actually have? How do I catalog it? How do I have a view of it? What's the compliance risk that I have? What's my security risk? How can I actually make sure I'm using data in a way which isn't ethically ambiguous or morally ambiguous or gets me fined a massive amount of money? These are all new challenges that didn't exist when all of your data fit inside of a single SQL database, when you didn't capture everything. These are very real problems when you have recordings of every single sales call, and you have boundless amounts of data from customer telemetry and usage of your products, including location information and names and things like that. So kind of this, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. You get all this amazing data at your fingertips, become super rich, but you have to be careful. So kind of this is, I'd say, like change number one. And if you think about what that means for the next generation of applications, they need to be reimagined and thought of existing in this world. This is their habitat, a data-rich environment, not a data-poor environment. They aren't the system of record of everything. The system of record of some and connect to a lot of other things, so changing a lot of the application experiences. Now, if we kind of go to the big AI component, really transforming the processes. And this is the part which we really feel has accelerated dramatically the last probably 2 years from a commercial and enterprise perspective. If we look at kind of what that means is our customers are coming to us and saying, I need to have an AI strategy. I need to have an AI approach that gives me kind of results. Like this is some study done about kind of the impact of AI, and basically 90% of execs are asking, please, what's my AI strategy? I need to have an AI strategy to go drive line of business optimization. And usually this is the question that happens in advance of adoption, and this is, I think, a desire that happens in advance of companies being created. But I would say a lot more people are asking this question than are asking about, say, metaverse or IoT or a lot of other things. I'd say this is probably the most transformational next wave of technology that we hear from our customers. And if we look at kind of what's made that possible, a big component is just technology. If we look at kind of how you actually build these models, how you actually use AI in your application, there's a long history of optimization and improvement and enhancement. And if we look at some of our products, AI that we built 3 years ago, we just throw away. And we had teams of dozens of machine learning specialists work on a single model, doing data prep, data clean, labeling, spend a whole bunch of money. And it's just worse than what's the rightmost thing. These big transformer models, these big foundational models or large language models. Something off the shelf of there with a few simple prompts beats something that we spent $50 million of R&D on. That is a big change, because that means these foundational models, which are usually an API away, are available to everybody and beat out these big AI teams. And already you see an explosion in the last 18 months of new companies which just ride with some simple business logic on top of these AI capabilities. And if you kind of look at that progression, everybody has really woken up to what's possible. And things like the highly visible like DALL-E and GPT-3 and BERT and so on have really come about to really generate up that energy. And for folks that kind of aren't super familiar with it, I'll do a brief explanation of I think why it's so exciting and what it means for our customers. So for large language models, for folks that haven't heard it, you definitely need to learn about it. Just trained on a massive corpus of data, generate models with a huge number of parameters, and I'll have a few examples in a second. And for consumption inference time, it's very easy to do tuning, and it's also very easy with just a few prompts to guide the model to do what you want it to do. So for example, you can take some of these large language models and tell it in a prompt to say, I'm going to ask you to summarize a sales call. Please summarize this as if it were a sales call. And it will actually perform pretty dang good off the shelf, out of the box to go do that. That is a very different world of AI engineering. And the thing, if we go back to that public cloud analogy I made earlier, there used to be a huge barrier to go launch a cloud service, to go launch a SaaS. Right? You have to go get servers and rack them and have, put it in a colo, things like that. Then all of a sudden, VMs are an API away. All of a sudden, storage is an API away. Network is an API away. These capabilities and the way you can tune them and optimize them, be an API away, mean that there's going to be a complete revolution. Just like there was an explosion of SaaS applications 10 years ago, there's going to be an explosion of these AI applications over the next decade. So I'll use DALL-E as just an example because I think it's more exciting than just pure natural language. So for folks that who here has seen or used Dolly in some form? Okay, awesome, great. So I'm preaching to the choir. No, so if you kind of go look, like here's just a few examples where based on some text input, it can generate a nice little image, in this case of a golden retriever in the style of a starry night. Trained on a whole bunch of data, but over time it gets a lot better because we train on larger amounts of data, right? And so we released Dolly, or OpenAI released Dolly 2, and basically it got more and more realistic based on the more data that we fed into it. And here's an example of a more sophisticated one, which has concepts like style and, say, activities and actions to go produce a beautiful image of teddy bears mixing sparkling chemicals as mad scientists as digital art. It's pretty dang good. And if you look at, there's just companies or even applications which are just basically taking this off the shelf and building experiences. Now, the thing that has kind of happened, which is game-changing from our view, is the fact that this has really become a scaling problem. It's much more like, can I pack more transistors on a CPU? It's, can I pack more training data as I go build out this model? And if you go look at that same prompt and look at the number of parameters that are generated and the size of the model over time, you can see how it gets better and better and better over time. And there's optimizations and things that you do, but fundamentally, core technology remains the same, just bigger. Just like how if I say pack more transistors onto a CPU, it gets better at a higher density. Same type of idea. And this is a type of problem that, as computer scientists and software engineers, we're pretty amazing at tuning and scaling over time. So if you go look at this trend line in just a few years, it's not that hard to imagine what's going to be possible in a few more years. That is pretty alarming, maybe, but pretty amazing in what's going to be possible. And if we kind of look at like the background of a lot of these things, is we tend to have the beauty of the internet and the beauty of so many pieces of software out there and that data-rich environment is you have boatloads of data in a way that you've never had before. You don't have labels or anything on them, but you have boatloads of data. So if you kind of go back to how these things stack on top of each other, in a data-rich world, you can start to build big AI that just, if all it needs is a lot of data to be smart, we have lots of data. And kind of that evolution is what's really made it possible for us to go build these amazing models at scale. Some that, of course, Microsoft consumes and partners with others like OpenAI, and some that we build ourselves to really use things like basically mass language models to go do the good distribution and understanding of, say, just raw text. So instead of having to go label the internet, you can just use MLM to basically build a representation of input data and labeled data. Doing kind of the probability distribution. Very, very smart people coming up with this. And that self-supervised learning really made it possible for us to go just make it be a data problem, right? So more data, more intelligence. Big data, big AI. That's kind of the transition that we're seeing. And as we go think about how we build out experiences over time, the way we've approached it in terms of adopting this stuff at Microsoft is I like to think of the analogy as a phylogenetic tree. So this is a bio quiz. Who's familiar with a phylogenetic tree? Okay, very few. I'm glad that I built this amazing diagram to explain it. So phylogenetic tree is what you can do with it is you can kind of look at genealogy and basically traits of evolved animals to understand how animals have evolved. So if you go back in time and say, who all has lungs, right? So animals who have lungs, they forked off, a billion years ago. Things that don't have lungs, they forked off before that because they would have lungs if they did. Who has claws, who doesn't? Who has fur, who doesn't? Who has live births, who doesn't? You can kind of start to map out and understand how over a billion years, all these different amazing animals evolved and kind of where their most common ancestor is based on these traits and genetic sequencing. And for me, I think this is probably one of the coolest things ever, because if you go through all of this, you can start to really understand where things came from or how rare it is to evolve. Now, when it comes to these large language models, I like to think we've basically done the same thing. And someday, 100 years from now, someone will draw a phylogenetic tree of big AI. And I'll give an example from how we do it inside of Microsoft. So Microsoft has a big partnership with OpenAI. And if you look at the left-hand side of this, you can see GPT-3, right? Pretty off-the-shelf model. Then you say do additional tuning, and you have things like Dolly or Codex. And Codex is basically the evolved version of GPT-3 focused on programming languages. And for example, a version of Codex is what's used in GitHub Copilot. Now, we, inside of business applications, can also do a derivative of that version of Codex. And we don't go retrain the whole thing. We can do maybe 12 to 24 hours of retraining, then some prompt engineering. And we can use that to build a natural language to workflow engine. So I can walk up and say, whenever someone submits a document to the share file or the share location, email their manager for approval. And if they approve it, mark it, the document as final. I can just say that, and it will build a workflow for me. And you do that, our team didn't go retrain the whole world. We actually just took the derivative of GPT-3 through many hops. Same thing for data queries in BI. Same thing for like coaching sales engineers when they're on a phone call. Same thing like generating marketing content for emails. The right-hand thing are all capabilities that we have in our products today at Microsoft. And we were able to do it so quickly because of this derivative. And I think if we go look to the future, what we're increasingly going to see is there's going to be a few big foundational models and then just tweaks, 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 tweaks on top of it. And these things at the leaf don't require that much work compared to the original model, but are the ones that provide the actual value. Because if you take GPT-3 and try to make it be a sales coaching AI model, it's terrifying what it coaches them to say. Not good. So how do you go make sure they actually behave professionally? It's the layers in between. And you do it by taking the 99% of genius that happened to the left and adding your 1%. And I bet if you go draw another tranche and another tranche of this tree, you probably have 100 unicorns of companies just waiting to be created. So kind of this is how we see this stuff evolving. At least this is our current thesis. Of course, that can always change. But this is how we see it happening. And it's not going to be by having 100 versions of GPT-3. The innovation from companies isn't going to come from the left-hand side. It's going to come on the right-hand side. And just like how there's not 100 companies selling you VMs behind an API, but instead there's a few companies, like 4 or 5, that sell you VMs behind an API, and then hundreds and thousands and millions of companies that build on top of that, the same type of thing is probably going to happen here. And as we go to all these companies, this is the opportunity for our applications. This is the opportunity for Power Platform and low code. Because we really can take these business-specific, business value, business pointy solutions and provide it to them out of the box. And I would say we haven't done anything which is kind of tuned per customer, but tuned per domain is very, very common. Now, for the third piece, this idea of going from human-driven apps to AI-driven apps. If you kind of look at some of the things where we've started to really push on this, it's this idea of instead of moving from AI on the side coaching in the loop, and humans the main driver, and AI is just kind of popping up once in a while, like Clippy style, we're moving more to a model where AI is driving a lot, and humans are on the side kind of making the important decisions, and human is in the loop. And what we've seen based on our research is that this requires us to completely throw away everything we know about building UI to do it right. And I'll show an example from one of our products, Power Automate, in a second. And I think for folks that are maybe a little bit older, go back, say, 15 years ago, and what were mobile apps like? They weren't just PC apps copy-pasted to run on a phone, right? Completely different experiences, completely different use cases. Same type of thing happens here. You don't just want to copy-paste the classic React-based web app or your classic iOS and Android app and add AI into it. That's kind of missing the point. You have to completely start over and really kind of let AI take the wheel right alongside you as kind of a Copilot experience. And the first big example, and probably the most broadly known example, is GitHub Copilot from Microsoft. And I think Replit just launched like Ghostwriter, so same type of idea. So this idea where AI actually will go autocomplete and fill out your code. And the stats are pretty amazing. Upwards of 30% plus of code that is, for people who use the capability, is suggested by the AI. And I don't know about everybody on here who runs an engineering team. If I could get 30% more code, that's not how it converts perfectly, but if I get 30% more productivity from my engineers, I mean, that's worth a lot of money to me, very transformational. And this is just a V1, right? Think of like the V1 of like something like the iPhone. Like, it wasn't that clear that it was changing that much, but it very quickly iterated and changed a lot. This is V1 of Copilot, and it's doing 30% plus of your code. We think that this Copilot and Copilots kind of in lots of other use cases are going to really transform how you work. Second example, kind of close to where, near and dear to my heart, in Power Automate. So for folks that don't know, Power Automate is a low-code robotic process automation tool. Massive adoption in the enterprise. And basically, it's the classic RPA or workflow automation tool. And that's what it has been for the last few years. And what I mean by that is, it's drag and drop macro recording. That's how you build it. Well, earlier this month, we announced something called Power Automate Copilot. And what Power Automate Copilot does is it allows a person to build automations from natural language, that example I gave earlier. This is actually in production right now based on that phylogenetic tree from GPT-3, where a user can walk up and say the automation they want to do across multiple data sources and multiple actions, and it will generate the automation for them automatically. And we then give them a visual representation using the low-code designer, say, here's what I built. Edit as you need to. And we've launched this, and what's amazing, so folks that have kind of tracked NPS or Net Promoter Score for their products, you know how hard it is to move it. For users who leverage the natural language to automation experience, NPS went up 20 points, which I would say we could work for 2 years just focused on NPS, and we probably don't move it 20 points. And this is on a product which has a pretty high NPS already. So really a fundamentally different experience, huge delighter, and has opened the window of who can do automations. So it's not just IT, and it's not just RPA specialists. It's, can you describe your problem in natural language? And if you think about how it works for a lot of IT projects today, is that's exactly what you do. You go to someone IT or a developer and say, here's my problem. Can you please automate it? Let me describe it to you. In the future, can a business user just start to describe their problems to an AI and get something generated and iterate on to improve over time? That's kind of where the Copilot's going. Or another one, which is, like, I'd say a very personal passion project for me, is process mining. So if folks haven't heard of process mining or task mining, what it does is it can look at the processes that run through systems of record. So say processing returns or doing payments or working through accounts payable or tracking what people do on their PC. So say in a contact center, the clicks and keyboard strokes that people do to work on a support case. So process mining kind of does that passively. What we're starting to see is that we can use that passive observation of what people are doing, then use some models that are on that phylogenetic tree of kind of training, but specific to automation and processes in the business domain, and automatically create an understanding of how processes work. And if you ever go into an enterprise and try to sell them, say, business software, the first question they always ask is, what the heck do people do today, and what the heck are they going to do tomorrow, and why is it better? What if you could just watch what people do and then have an AI tell you what they do, and then also have an AI tell you what you can do better and automate? And that's what process mining, it's something we call it Process Advisor as a capability at Microsoft. It's something we already have in market today. And it does it by, it looks at multiple users and kind of clusters it together. Pretty amazing stuff. So this world of AI and humans working together is not that far away. And like the revolution is happening now. And for us, we really view this as this is the watershed moment where at Microsoft, we can kind of go from, say, not the number one in a lot of biz app spaces to clearly becoming the leader because of this new view and new values. So kind of a lot of exciting things happening very, very quickly. And it's happening in small and big companies alike. Because just like smartphones and really like the iPhone and all subsequent phones, kind of everybody sees that changes here, big and small companies. Last bit is around collaboration. And this is something we've been working on for a while and is super important. And I promise it will tie back to intelligent apps. But basically, this idea of collaboration is kind of obvious, right? Like who would work on a Word document or a spreadsheet or a presentation without the ability for multiple users to work at the same time together, right? Nobody even knows what that's like anymore. And that's true across industries. Canva, Figma, like that's kind of Figma's amazing breakthrough is browser-based real-time co-authoring collaboration of a design surface. Real-time collab has probably been one of the most amazing things of cloud web-based SaaS. And what's amazing is kind of that's just a productivity example, but really in every industry. And it's funny, just collaboration, just real-time collaboration has been enough to disrupt a lot of markets. G Suite was pretty disruptive to Microsoft Office 12 years ago because of real-time collaboration. Figma is very disruptive to many, many companies because of its real-time collaboration. It's something which really kind of changes the way people work. And if you think about what that means is it's about productivity, it's about better human-to-human interaction. And whenever these types of changes happen, there tends to be a lot of disruption in the market. And like these discontinuities are the opportunities for new entrants, to basically new markets, new categories, new segments. And what's amazing about real-time collaboration, I'll just do an aside, is real-time collaboration is in all these different apps, but it's not in biz apps at all. Like where is there real-time collab in a CRM or an ERP? So, which is kind of mind-boggling. Dynamics has real-time collab, but yes. So if you kind of look at this, there's a lot of change happening. A lot of change. And everybody is kind of grappling with this question of, okay, I believe you. The future is intelligent apps. How am I going to build intelligent apps? If I go back to that phone analogy, when everybody said, yeah, phone apps are the future, guess how many companies don't have phone apps for their employees for a lot of their common tasks? Almost all of them. I talked to CIOs or some stat, it's like the backlog of mobile apps is 5 times as big as they can actually go build, right? So just, okay, it's bad. It's about to get a hell of a lot worse because of intelligent apps. So how do we go about solving this problem? And the kind of stats show that this is a really big problem. There's over 500 million new apps that need to be built in the next 2 years. That's more than all the apps built in the last 40 years, so staggering scale. And kind of these are IDC and Gartner numbers. And in just the Americas, there's a 4 million professional developer shortfall to actually go build these apps. So it's kind of the worst possible effect, right? Demand is going like this, and supply is kind of flat, right? And as we know from like oil prices, that can cause really bad stuff to happen, right? So this has been, and this is not a new problem. It's kind of interesting. The developer shortfall, you see a graph, it just gets worse every year. Never gets better. So if you go back, say 15 years ago, 10 years ago, there's a lot of talk of how do we solve this? By doing this. Teach everybody how to write code, right? In high school, you learn how to write essays, learn how to write programs, learn how to write Python, right? I'd say that experiment has run and has not been successful, has not moved the needle. And it's kind of funny because I'd say it's a very developer-centric worldview, right? If you want to build software, write code and build software the way I do. So one of the big things that we've been doing at Microsoft is just focus on low code, no code. So instead of teaching everybody how to write code, reach everyone with low code. How many people can use Excel? Billion plus in the world. How many people can write Python? Under 10 million. Excel is low code, Python is pro code. So this is a very, I'd say, user-friendly, user-centric perspective. So instead of making everybody come to the way we want them to write and build applications, we're going to go and make sure they're supported the way they need to. And democratization always wins. If there's anything about software in the last 30 years, which I think is true, whenever you take something which previously was confined to a narrow audience and make it be available to a big audience, everything changes. And for us, low code has been that catalyst at Microsoft. Basically, whether you're a business user, so someone who sits in the finance department, the legal department, the sales department, or an IT admin. And I say IT admin as someone who's technically proficient, but is non-coding. They are not going to deploy a Kubernetes cluster, but they could write a bash script, right? And then professional developers. Low code empowers all of them. Billion plus low code developers on Earth exist because they can use Excel. That's kind of the #1 low code platform. So at Microsoft, that's where that Power Platform comes in. It's a no-code, low-code way for people to build these solutions. And we have Power Automate for low-code robotic process automation, Power Apps for low-code web and mobile apps, Power Virtual Agents for conversational agents and chatbots, Power Pages for external website, Power BI for analytics and reporting, really focused on how do you go make it so anyone can build these types of things. And if you go look at Power Apps, today it's maybe forms over data, dumb apps. Tomorrow it's intelligent apps. Basically making sure people are actually building these right types of experiences. So that's kind of what Power Platform has done. And kind of, Tim mentioned some of the stats. They're kind of unbelievable in how quickly. So Power Platform didn't even exist before 2019, so just 3 years ago, a little over three and a half years ago. And if you look at kind of what's happened since then, Power Platform, Satya, our CEO, shared this a couple quarters ago, over $2 billion of revenue in the preceding 12 months, growing over 70%. One of the fastest growing products and portfolios in the history of Microsoft. And the reason is because it actually becomes accessible to everybody. And Power BI is the #1 self-service BI tool in the market. Power Apps is the #1 self-service application or low-code application development platform in the world. And Power Automate, depending on how you measure it, is either #1 or #2 for RPA. All in a very, very short period of time because it becomes more accessible. Now, what these AI-assisted applications can start to do is they can lower the bar even further. Right? Because you can start to talk to them with natural language. And if you look at something where, like DALL-E is the ultimate low-code, no-code way of building images. I talk to it in natural language and I get an image. So we think there's going to be an explosion of applications in this domain. And kind of Gartner released a stat, 65% of app development in the enterprise will be low-code. So kind of this is another big change happening. So a lot of things cooking at the same time. Now, this is going to cause a lot of change and kind of how people rethink and rebuild things. So I'd say, like, if I were to kind of boil it down, it's those 2 slides I said in the beginning. Apps are going to become intelligent, and everybody's going to become involved in building stuff and creating stuff. Those 2 things, we think, are going to completely define this era of business software. And kind of that's where we are positioning. That's where we're making our bets. That's where we see all of our momentum. But there's more exciting stuff coming. And I think we kind of debate about should we share this because it's kind of like very forward-looking, but there's some really exciting things that we think are going to be possible when AI and collaboration meet. So if you think about the real-time collaboration example I gave, where say 3 people are working on a document together, right? That's from people working side by side. We're going to go to a world where it's people working side by side and AI working with you, right? So it's 3 humans and an AI working on a doc. And that level of productivity, if you think about like truly a virtual worker, which is AI powered, is a pretty solvable problem. That's not AGI, right? Helping people write a better document, that's not AGI, right? Helping people do a better design of an application screen, not AGI. Helping people build a great special effects video, not AGI. This is actually something which is pretty attainable in a pretty near term, we think, and stuff that we're working on. And we're going to see a lot of these changes where people go from humans working together with AI kind of coaching and helping at some points to real time, humans collaborating with one another alongside AI. And basically every single process that people do in the office is going to have a Copilot of some form. Won't always be called Copilot, won't always be from one vendor, but think about it. There's an AI chilling next to you, coaching, guiding, optimizing with you. And if you think about just a 20% productivity boost, it doesn't sound that big. That is like the biggest productivity boost that's happened since the invention of the PC for office work. Like we're talking about the first big generational change probably in 30 years for office and information work. And kind of that's like the opportunity that we really see. Like in Power Apps, we have real-time co-authoring, and we're also working to have the AI Copilot show up. Like we think this is kind of our opportunity. And if you think about low-code, which can make, say, a team 70% more productive, add AI, maybe that makes them another 70% productive. You're talking about no longer a 4 million developer shortfall, 2 million developer shortfall, million developer shortfall, because you enlisted business users. And like the scale and magnitude is going to be pretty fast of this adoption. Here's kind of a stat from IDC that 85% of enterprises by 2026, that's almost 3 years away, will make their workers 25% more productive using these types of concepts, combining human expertise and AI. And like I mentioned that this will be the biggest change probably in 30 years since the PC. Like we kind of view it as it's kind of interesting that the first place that AI is really going to help boost productivity is going to be in sophisticated, creative information and office worker scenarios. Just like how folks say you didn't have machines to weave cloth, or you didn't have machines to put down railroad tracks, or you didn't have machines to like have a boiler or something, the steam engine, that same type of thing. And I would say Industrial Revolution 4.0, there's kind of been claims for this a lot. And we really think there's smoke here based on what we're already seeing with our products and market and the scenarios we've already been able to ship, where there's real office reimagination and real productivity boosts. And just like how no one would, say, go out and weave fabric by hand, you have machines that do it, or even sew clothing by hand. The vast majority is made by machines. People just won't work without that machine support in the future. And it has all kinds of benefits in terms of deflationary forces in a time of great inflation, all of that. But it's a big, big shift kind of across the board. So that's what we're thinking, how we frame intelligent apps, how we frame low-code, no-code, and how we think it's really going to transform sales, customer service, finance, supply chain, HR, and development. Even developers are going to see a lot of change because of this stuff. And in the process, because it's going to be such a different user experience and such a different value proposition, what used to be an asset in terms of built-in install base and code and IP is now an albatross. So that kind of is going to be the rapid evolution and revolution that we see. So anyway, hopefully that was a good overview of how we're thinking about it at Microsoft in my part of the world there. And I think I'm a little bit long. We might have 15 minutes for questions, maybe a little bit less now. But I'd say love to open it up for any questions from the audience.
Hey, thanks, Charles. Nice talk. So one of the big sort of hidden rocks, I think, with everything we're talking about today on AI is explainability. And a lot of enterprise is constrained either by regulation or by policy. How do you see that playing into the development, and does it create a headwind to development?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think I'll separate two things, because I would say there's explainability and the responsible use of AI. And I would say explainability isn't necessarily required for the responsible use of AI, because one of the big challenges we've seen with these big foundational models is good luck explaining what the heck is happening. I mean, no one knows. Like, people who build it, it's like, how did that come up with that answer? No one knows. I mean, people know, but really, you're going to have a hard time explaining. And I think we're going to have to become okay with it. Because, like, for example, how do we get electricity for this room? I have no idea. I mean, genuinely, how does a CPU work? I don't know. but you kind of have to at some point accept abstraction on top of it and trust that there's kind of a responsible forger and creator behind the scenes. So I'd say I don't think explainability is going to be a prerequisite for a lot of these scenarios, particularly because all the innovation I talked about today, there's still a human sitting in the loop. So there's still a human saying, this is OK. I approve. Do this. And you can still be 30%, 40% more productive. The responsible AI piece is important, though, because there are many scenarios where you cannot legally use AI to make decisions or influence decisions. And also, there's many examples where there's certain data you can't even use to train a model. You have to basically prove what you trained on. So I think there will be parts of the market which won't be able to benefit from this revolution. Just like today, there are parts of the software market that, or say companies and enterprises that don't get to enjoy the benefits of cloud computing. A lot of big banks, a lot of government organizations, still all on premise, and with really no light at the end of the tunnel to be in the cloud because of regulation. So I do think regulation will limit, and there will be kind of spots where it doesn't exist and kind of grow. I don't think, just one person's opinion, that explainability will be a big thing, but I do think responsible AI principles will be critical. So making sure that you're using it in the right scenario, in the right way, with the right human oversight is the only way that these types of things can really take off in a way where there's not a huge regulatory backlash. And it's like, we talk about that at Microsoft all the time. Responsible AI is kind of table stakes. So, does that hopefully answer the question? Yeah, like I would say an implied separation between B2B and B2C. I would say it's less separation between B2B to B2C and probably more government organization, heavily regulated organization, like say life sciences and financial services, and certain functions and roles like HR. So that's probably, I think, what the split would be.
Charles, right here, this way.
Okay, good.
Fantastic talk. So curious about how you guys are thinking about, once you've sort of created this low-code, no-code declared way of representing these apps, what about monitoring and are you thinking about explore, exploit? At which point do you essentially say, hey, I've reached my peak, and how are you guys thinking about that?
Yeah, so I think one of the big, like the core principles we have for low code is that one platform that works for the simple to the complex, one platform that works for business users to IT and pro devs. And what that means is inside of the Power Platform, we actually have experiences where something gets really popular, a lot of usage, a high volume, an alert can go to IT, and IT can take it over. And probably the most sophisticated low-code customers out there, they actually have this kind of ingestion process well-defined. You build an app, it can do whatever. The moment it's used by more than 500 people, IT is going to run it. And IT likes the platform because it's built for them too, so they keep it on the platform, not a rewrite. And that, I would say, when we started, that was like a very contested viewpoint because there was a view that there's going to be low code for business users and low code for IT, and there'll be two different things. And kind of what we found is it actually doesn't work that way because the moment you get a popular app on a thing built for business users and you have to rewrite it in IT, they're going to ban that system in the company. So we think it's actually kind of one continuous platform. And like Excel is my favorite example because like my mom can use Excel to do a grocery list, and Goldman Sachs can use Excel to do calculations of credit default swaps. Like that's one app, one platform. That's kind of amazing. So that's kind of what we're pushing for a Power Platform, and I think low code has to support that.
Hi. Oh, I can use the mic this time. Awesome. Thanks for your talk, Charles. I'd like to ask you what you think is going to be the next industry that gets heavily disrupted by this kind of real-time AI assistant intelligent applications.
I would say probably like anything that has heavy, like today, anything that has heavy natural language usage. So like legal, professional services, contract, we think there's a lot of opportunity, like a lot of disruption there. We think there's a lot of disruption just in core functional domains. So we think the way sales will be done, particularly with the move to like more and more digital selling, we think that will change. And the place, kind of the big bet that we've actually made that will be completely disrupted is contact center and customer support. Because like that's a place where if you automate 20%, that's just money that falls directly to your bottom line. And there's some stat out there for B2C companies, they'll spend 2 to 4, 3 to 5% of revenue on support. So if you do a 25% reduction in cost just by AI, that's 1 point falling to their bottom line. For technology companies, 1 point doesn't seem that big of a deal. But for most industries, a point to your bottom line, that is a pretty big deal. That's like a board level conversation. And it's not that hard to do because AI is literally built for this, right? Like you take these amazing new large language models and train it to help answer common questions. And kind of that's a place where we have a lot of investment right now, just specifically there. And that we see a lot of growth there. And like the Nuance acquisition that we did, that was a big part of it too, actually. So I'd say in a few specific domains, but anywhere where there's lots of people working with lots of content, and certainly anywhere where there's a lot of repetitive actions by people will be disrupted. And like BPO, like business process outsourcing, that's going to look completely different. I think it'll be much more BPO will be outsourcing the creation and tuning and running of these machinery and exception handling as opposed to kind of like repetitive tasks. Cool. Any other questions?
So we had a little bit of a debate at lunch today about foundation models, and are we going to have a few big foundation models that control them all, or are we going to have a lot of smaller purpose-built, personalized foundation models with different verticals, different use cases? You touched on this a little bit, but what's your perspective on that? Where do you see that going in the next 5 years?
Yeah. I would say my view, and like take this as a humble Microsoft person's view, is there will be like a few big shared foundational models. Because you think of how big they are today. Think of how big models are today. They're going to be like 100 times bigger in a couple of years. In 10 years, they'll be 1,000 times bigger. So you're not going to want to go build a lot of those. So I think it'll end up like that kind of inheritance model where there'll be a big thing, you'll tune, you'll tune, you'll tune. Right now, the debate we have, I would say like our view is we kind of view that debate as settled. There'll be a few big foundational models, period. The question we have now is we have these like derivatives. Will they be repetitive derivatives, or will there actually start to have to be derivatives that are company specific? So like, for example, say we sell a process for customer support. Is it a single model we use for all of our customers for customer support, or is there actually tuning specific to customers? Because today we can afford to spend $1 million, $2 million to do tuning for workflow generation, $2 million to do tuning for GPUs, to go do tuning for sales coaching. Like we can do that, but can we do it per customer? We don't know. So like that's where I say that's where the debate is, but I'd say at least our viewpoint is a few big foundational models is going to be the key, with lightweight tuning and prompt engineering on top. So hopefully I'm not stepping on a landmine by answering that. But yeah. Awesome. Cool. I think there's a question there. Sorry, over there too. Okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so you noted the challenges that happen transitioning from desktop to mobile and the user experience aspects that happen in that there. When your teams are trying to build more native human AI teaming products like Copilot, what are the UX challenges that your teams are facing? Because we're facing stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And then what are the solutions you're finding actually works when you do that type of collaboration?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is like natural language as a user interface model is back. An actual natural language, not like a command line. So and I think there's a lot of great papers out there, and too, we talk about this at Microsoft, this idea of like the new Unix command line for an office worker is just natural language, right? And if you take that as an assumption, the way I interact with a kind of UI is just fundamentally different. Like for us, we're almost saying like, what if this app just became a single search, like a search bar, like almost like Google, and just I type and I type, gives me things, I type and I type, and it just kind of keeps iterating. And it's not just images. It could be reports. It could be analytics. It could be visualizations. It could be exploration of research data. Like, is that something I could do? I'm just interacting like that. If you try to end up with that user interface by starting from today's GUIs, you'll never get there. That's not an iterative approach. That's a like flush it down the toilet and start over approach. So I say natural language as an input model is a thing we're definitely exploring. And like that Power Automate example I showed for our RPA product, that's kind of what it is. It literally is I walk up and say I want to automate something, and I just start typing, and clicking, typing, clicking, typing, clicking, typing, clicking, and I have a bot. That is real. Like you do not get there by starting from the other side. We support both. We actually think that's an asset because you can edit and stuff like code behind. So I'd say that's one piece. Natural language as an input, different UI model. Second thing is we think this idea of like iteration is really key. It's not like I walk up and say, I want this, and then I get exactly what I want. Like that's not even how it works with people, right? Like if I work with a designer to make a beautiful like UI screen, I don't just say, I want a border. It kind of looks like Uber, and a map, and I want a search bar, and it's probably centered in the bottom. Like, and I don't get exactly what I want. That's just not how that's not how information transfer works. That iterative model is going to be really key as well. So we think a lot of natural language. I think increasingly it will be multimedia, so images, charts, graphs, text, voice, lookalike, and then just highly iterative. So that's where our ideation is right now. And that I think is the disruption. A UI like that is just not something you get to iteratively from what exists today. And that's kind of why we're so excited. Just like how you don't iterate from a Windows app to an iOS app. You just do, create new repo, start writing code. You don't clone the repo and try to edit it into place. So that's one piece. And the second thing would be, I think there's just going to be a whole lot of discovery in the next 2 years because we don't know, right? Like when Touch UI first became prevalent, there was just a lot of learning required to figure out like what does that actually mean from a delightful user experience. So I think there's just going to be a lot of learning, a lot of experimentation. And what's funny is at some point, someone will make it be good enough, and it will become the standard. Kind of like a steering wheel of a car. Like it's not the ideal way to drive a car. Like there's a million better ways to steer. but just it's the standard, and it was good enough. So that will happen too eventually. So anyway, that's kind of the view we have. And I would say, like, if I were to go create my own company today, it would definitely be in this domain, and it would definitely be starting from scratch, throw away everything I have from a UI. But the beauty, you get to do that inside Microsoft too. So anyway, yeah, cool. Yeah.
You may have answered my question with your last statement. So a bit of an unconventional question. My daughter's actually studying computer science, and yesterday asked me about internship ideas over the summer. She wants to do something technical. I had suggested maybe aligning with a startup and doing something there. In terms of, like, I do see the disruption happening because I have worked, I'm actually an engineer who coded and did time studies for robotics. So, like, I could totally see that being an automated process. It's almost like this, how has that not happened already? Now I work for many years, that was eons ago, with enterprises who want to change so that they're not disrupted. And to your point about cloud migrations, a lot of them are still legacy-based, they're on-prem, they're kind of trying to rationalize how they go to the cloud and maintain some of the apps that they need to. For the generation of students that are right now, learning what it will be, let's say 5-10 years from now, what would be your advice, for example? Because I work sometimes mentoring students and things like that. What would be a good internship for somebody studying computer science, given the direction that's inevitable that you see?
Yeah, I would probably say in my mind, there's probably 4 legs of like the critical technology for the next decade in computer science. That's 4. There's 4 things out there, and I would say it's going to be, of course, cloud, because I mean, like you mentioned, most people have not even completed their move to cloud. So just basic cloud engineering, building a complex distributed system in the cloud, like that is just, demand will only increase. Second is mobile is clearly going to be the prevailing computing pattern for consumers for quite some time. So something related to mobile expertise, something related to the new like foundational AI stuff, generative AI stuff, that domain. And I would say probably approaching it less from a research perspective, unless that's a passion, but more of a, how do I take this and use it to transform parts of work, just like how people took AWS and use it to transform parts of work 10 years ago. And then probably the 4th one would be like hands-free kind of devices, and that's like mixed reality, augmented reality, or virtual reality. And like if we go look for kind of my area, those are like the 4 big investment areas we focus on. Like mobile for first-line workers because we're work-oriented, like cloud and AI is kind of every single thing that we build now is a focus. And then we even have some pretty amazing traction for mixed reality devices in work environments. So we actually have something called Remote Assist and Guides, which is something that works for augmented reality, where you can basically follow guides in the real world to, say, do repairs and maintenance tasks and things like that. That actually has kind of incredible traction that we didn't expect. And like we did it was actually on CNN last Saturday, how like Toyota uses this to train all of their people in factories. It's to replace a paper binder. So anyway, those are probably the 4 pillars that I think are super interesting.
Thank you.
I'm getting the yank. Here you go.
That's my unenviable job.
Awesome. I'm just a grandma.
Well, thanks again.